life a bigger pizza pie, that's amore. When the world seems to shine like you've had too much wine, that's amore.
I adore him. He's like my big brother. He was a bigger-than-life, wonderfully handsome, very, very charming man with great talent. I think I was in awe of him.
Now, before you do anything else, Jerry, introduce my song and make it lovely.
It's Academy Award time. He gets so carried away.
You couldn't get any hotter than he was. He was hot in nightclubs, he was hot on records, he was hot on television.
Okay, Dum-Dum, what'll it be?
Oh, I'll have the usual glass of milk. Are you sure this is my cue card right here?
Absolutely brilliant comedian. Perfect timing, perfect delivery. He's so great a comedian, it's a pity God gave him a singing voice.
Everybody falls in love somehow. Something in your kiss just told me that sometime is now. Everybody finds somebody someplace.
He had more guts, more courage, more dignity, and carried himself with the kind of aplomb that most men never even dream about.
There's nothing phony about the man. I mean, that's it. You look at this guy and you go, hey, he's having a good time.
The smart people.
The smart people.
Yes.
Yes. And what's the major problem confronting our universities in, like,
The smart people. That's you know, I never thought of that.
That's because you're dumb like me.
What did you get? There happened to be a little food. Little food, F-U-D. We're doing 6 shows a night here. We're hungry.
How many?
Well, 2 here, 4 in the room. That's 6, Daddy. I don't care where you count it.
For almost half a century, first as partners with Jerry Lewis, then on his own, or with legendary friends like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin's job was to have fun as America's favorite swinger.
Oh, don't be nervous, folks. Dean is fine. He just fell in the wine cellar, that's all.
Why women in the song? I mean, what else is there to say about me? I love to sing, and I love women.
Dean Martin's story started in 1913, when Gaetano Crocetti received a ticket to America from his brother, Giuseppe, in Steubenville, Ohio. Gaetano found work as a barber and soon fell in love with Angela Barra, another recent arrival from Italy. In 1914, they were married. 2 years later, they had their first child, Guillermo William. The following summer, on June the 7th, 1917, they had another son, Dino Paul. With his father making up to $50 a week as a barber, Dean never wanted for anything. He had his own bike, nice clothes, and was even a member of the Boy Scouts. But Steubenville was a tough town, a town of steel mills and coal mines, and Dean's neighborhood was a tough one. At first, some of the other kids ridiculed the sharp-looking, well-mannered Dino, until they got into a fight with him and discovered he was no pushover. At 16, he left school. Out on his own, he began boxing under the name Kid Crochet.
He was a pretty good boxer, but he was a poor boxer. As a matter of fact, as he said, he was such a poor boxer, sounded like a routine, that he didn't have enough money for tape to tape up his knuckles, so all his knuckles were broken. Every time he hit a guy, the knuckles would split a little bit.
After a while, Dean gave up boxing and went to work in a tobacconist's. But it wasn't just tobacco that was sold. In the back was a gambling casino. Dean soon graduated from shop boy to croupier. When his aunts found out what he was doing, they told his mother he'd end up a gangster and die in the electric chair. She'd tell them they were crazy. Her son was going to be a star. Dean loved to sing. One of his heroes was Bing Crosby, and he saw every Crosby film that came to town.
Just one more word. I said that I was
everybody copied Dean. And then in time, they developed their own style, but it was the man, Bing, he started it all.
I guess you played the dog game o'er and over.
Another singer Dean admired was Harry Mills of the Mills Brothers.
You just quarreled with Sue, that's why you're blue.
Harry Mills was just a marvelous, easygoing kind of performer. Years later, when Dean and I were talking about something one day about singing styles and everything else, he said, he said it was Harry Mills that really was responsible for some of the mannerisms, he said, that I picked up.
After work, Dean and his friends would hang out at the clubs in town, where he often sang with the different bands. By 1938, he was getting offers to sing professionally with local bands, and he acquired his first stage name, Dino Martini. Within 2 years, Dean was on the air and on the road with band leader Sammy Watkins.
Here is the Sammy Watkins medley to match the season. Jingle Bells, Silent Night, and Dean Martin singing White Christmas.
It was Sammy Watkins who changed Dino's name to Dean Martin. From the start, Dean enjoyed getting laughs as much as hearing applause.
Handsome guy started to come down the stairs to a bolero tempo of Temptation. Handsome, so good looking, and he starts to sing Temptation. Yous came, I was alone, I should have known, yous was temptation. I fell off the chair.
In December 1943, Dean got his first important break to follow Frank Sinatra, the biggest singer of the decade, into the swanky Rio Bamba nightclub in New York. Although Dean got good reviews, he wasn't the smash Frank was, but the two singers hit it off straight away.
Well, for starters, I think Frank offered to help Dean early on. And Dean told him that he really appreciated it, and he did, but he really would like to have tried to make it more on his own.
Making it on his own in New York was tough going at first. When gigs and money became scarce, Dean went back to one of his earlier professions, boxing.
Dean told me that when he was young, that the way he made a living, because he had no skill, was to invite people in a hotel room and charge every person in there 50 cents, and then he and his friend would punch each other until one of them was knocked out.
At the time, Dean was sharing a hotel room with 6 others. One of them was 18-year-old comic Alan King.
Dean was the leader. Dean was the leader, the troublemaker. Dean always made trouble for everybody. He'd start a rumor at one side of the room, then deny it on the other side of the room. And before the evening was over, everybody was fighting with everybody. Did he say that? Dean said, what are you asking me? I just walked in.
Things started looking up when Dean landed a daily 15-minute local radio show. He even did screen tests for Columbia and MGM, but Hollywood wasn't interested. To them, he was just another Italian singer. One afternoon in 1944 came a chance meeting with another young comedian.
Dean was staying at the Belmont Plaza. I was appearing at the Glass Hat at the Belmont Plaza. And we met in the coffee shop a couple of times, and his sense of humor and mine, we just kicked in. We became very, very friendly.
Dean and Jerry often found themselves on the same bill, but performing together was the furthest thing from their mind. In the spring of 1946, when they were both playing at New York's Havana Madrid, one reviewer wrote that they had all the makings of a great act. The two friends paid little attention and continued to go their separate ways. On July the 25th, 1946, Jerry was booked into Skinny D'Amato's 500 Club in Atlantic City.
And the singer that was on the show, a guy named Jack Randall, good singer, had a very bad case of laryngitis. And Skinny D'Amato asked me who I thought should replace him. I said, Jesus, I got the best replacement in the world, my friend Dean Martin, who I think is in New York, and he's not working. And Skinny said, nah, I don't want another singer. I said, but you don't understand something. He don't just sing. He and I do things together that's really good. He said, oh, okay. So he books Dean. Dean comes in the first night. He sings his 3 songs. I did my record act, and we're in the dressing room. Skinny came up and said, where's all the funny things you guys are going to do? You either do them in the next show or you're both out of here. So I sat down and I wrote about 20 ideas. And Dean and I put it on its feet. The next show, we were on the stage 2 hours and 45 minutes. And the rest is history.
Got a mess of stripes there.
Yes, sir.
When did you enlist?
I joined the war in 1925.
There was no war in 25.
That's why I enlisted was put safe for April.
Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were soon the talk of the town.
The first night that Dean and I worked together, there were 4 people in the joint. But by the 4th night, you couldn't get into that club.
Well, let me finish. But I want to fight the big no more.
In the ring?
It's big no more.
You want to fight in the ring? Well, why not?
What's against my religion?
What's your religion?
I'm a devout coward.
Well, the appeal was that we, not that we didn't care about the audience, but we never looked at the audience. We would work like I am talking to you now. We would work to each other.
That isn't a union band.
I don't care about you or your union band.
Oh! See how mad they get?
I'm 19 and he's 29. And this wonderful balance between these 2 men, which was really the love that we had for one another, is what made that thing work.
I'm warning you.
No.
Off the stand.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry.
All right, let's take it from Asia Minor. Here we go.
Asia Minor.
Dean and Jerry were soon known as the wildest act in the business, maybe too wild for the more sophisticated clubs. In the spring of 1948, they were booked into the most famous and classiest of them all, New York's Copacabana.
Show that maybe this show you and I, we could sing together and do it.
Do it?
Together both one.
Let's make it a little harder, huh?
All right.
You and I do a trio.
A trio?
What's so funny?
Where are we going to get 4 guys?
Dean and Jerry were now officially in the big time. While still appearing at the club, they entered the new medium of television, making their TV debut on the first Ed Sullivan Show. Later, they were an even bigger hit on Milton Berle's Texaco Star Theatre. In Hollywood, they played the top club Slapsy Max's. On opening night, the entire film industry packed the place to see what all the noise was about. They weren't disappointed.
Then after our first show, about 5 producers came backstage and we signed a 6-year contract with Hal Wallace. That's how fast things happen with Jerry and myself.
In 1949, Martin and Lewis made their first film, My Friend Irma.
Tell them about Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, the terrific new comedy team that'll lay him in the aisles? Yeah, Joe. Martin's the one who sings.
See it in your smile, I hear it in your sigh, that we have found a feeling higher than high, my own, my only, my own.
What does Lewis do?
A male seal, a female seal, both together, a baby seal,
The offers started to pour in. NBC signed them for a weekly radio show.
It's the new, the great, the different, the Martin and Lewis show.
Dean,
Yeah?
I'm scared.
Look, we've done all right so far. We shouldn't be afraid. We did all right in nightclubs, didn't we?
Yeah, but those people paid $10 cover charge so they had to like us. But at a radio show, the audience gets in free, and at those prices, they can afford to hate us.
And they started recording for Capitol Records. On September the 1st, Dean married Jeannie Biggers, whom he'd met while he and Jerry were appearing in the Orange Bowl Parade.
I was Orange Bowl Queen, and he just followed the float. I looked down, and there he was, it was Christmas time, and he was carrying Christmas packages and just following the float. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I think we decided that was kismet. That was it. That was a lockup.
Martin and Lewis's schedule was so hectic that Dean and Jeannie's honeymoon became the publicity tour for My Friend Irma. The new Mrs. Martin couldn't help but feel a little jealous of her husband's other partner.
They just had more fun than anybody, I think. I envied them the good times that they had. And when they would work on stage, Dean and Jerry worked to each other. They made each other laugh. They would forget that there was an audience. And I think that's what made their act so extraordinary. Because, I mean, it was so contagious.
The single funniest act, meaning if you wanted to put a laugh meter on an audience, was Martin and Lewis. By far, no act in my career have I ever seen get the kind of laugh that they both got.
In the autumn of 1950, Dean and Jerry became two of television's biggest stars, with their monthly appearances as hosts of NBC's Colgate Comedy Hour. Scheduled opposite CBS's usually invincible Ed Sullivan, the duo beat Ed in the ratings every time they were on.
Hello. Hiya, here we are. Yes, dancers and funny pattern.
That's fine, fellas, but we have nothing for teams.
We're not a team, we work together. We work together, get a load of this. Here we are, just you and I. Let the world hurry by.
The rehearsals were wilder than the shows themselves, and Dean quickly became the production team's favorite.
I never saw any temperament come from Dean. Very relaxed, and he made everybody else feel relaxed. Dean also was the funnier of the two. Funnier in the sense that Dean had, came up with wonderful, wonderful lines all the time.
This is all of it, huh? You didn't leave nothing, none of this is in the locker. This is the whole thing.
This is everything. There's no more.
Good boy.
But I wanted you should build up my body like those other fellas. Strong.
Well, you get your health back. We'll see what we can do.
By 1952, they were the hottest act in show business. Their personal appearance tours broke attendance records all over the United States.
We played the Paramount Theater here, seated 4,000 people. And there were 75,000 people around the block.
And you bought a ticket for 75 cents, which was a lot of money in those days, and you went inside, you saw a movie, and then Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis did a show for a half an hour. They screamed at them. The audience would go from the theater to 43rd Street, and there was a window that you could look up, and there was their window. They would open the window, and they would shout at the crowd, and they would throw programs out or pictures, and there was no traffic. There was just people, boom, there, like it was New Year's Eve.
Same thing happened at the Chicago Theater. When we played there the next week, we played 9 shows a day, 63 shows in the week. We did 175 shows in 21 days.
But for all their success, Dean was beginning to feel frustrated at playing the straight man to the wildest, craziest comedian in show business. The talk in the industry was that Dean would be nowhere without Jerry. But Jerry thought otherwise.
He was the spine of what was Martin and Lewis, though Jerry got all of the accolades.
All right, drop it, Barney, drop it. Now, you apologize to me and make it quick, because if I walk off the stage without an apology, you're going to suffer the consequences.
I'll take the consequences.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Good word, too, ain't it?
With rumours that all was not well behind the scenes, their on-the-air kidding around now seemed to have an edge to it. The strain really came to the surface when Dean had his first big hit record with That's Amore in 1953. Even then, Jerry upstaged him.
When the moon hits your eye like a big bit of fire, that's amore. When the world seems to shine like you've had too much wine, that's amore.
Dean's entourage began saying that without Jerry, he could be another Perry Como. At the same time, Jerry's was telling him he could be another Chaplin if Dean was out of the picture.
Look now, Sue! Go ahead, sing now! You can't find it! Go ahead, sing! Sing now! Sing! Go ahead, sing now! Over!
Dean wanted to concentrate on his singing career and to try his hand at acting. Jerry wanted to direct, write, and produce. Their act was holding both of them back. By the spring of 1956, Dean had had enough.
Well, I just quit. I told him, this is it. I'm through. No more of this stuff. And of course, there was a big meeting with all the heads of Paramount Studios. And they said, you can't walk out on $20, $30 million. I said, well, you just watch me. And I walked out, that's all.
When Dean and I split, we angered this country. He didn't know if he'd have an audience. I didn't know if I'd have one.
On July the 25th, 1956, 10 years to the day after they officially teamed up, Dean and Jerry gave their last performance together at the Copacabana.
And there was everybody in show business in that Copa that night, watching the death of this magic. I don't know how I got through that. I don't know how he got through it. And I went up to my suite, Dean went up to his, and I called him on the phone. I said, thanks for a great ride, and I love you. And he said, I love you back. It was a great ride. And we hung up. We didn't talk for 20 years.
Nearly everybody in show business figured that Jerry couldn't miss on his own. As for Dean, they reckoned his career would be finished within a year. And for a while, it looked like they were right. With the breakup of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, 1957 marked the first time in more than 10 years that Dean Martin was on his own. His first solo film, 10,000 Bedrooms, wasn't doing well at the box office. His musical career got back on track with an engagement at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. He'd had an idea for a character he could play. Himself.
And here he is for your enjoyment, direct from the bar, Dean Martin.
Re-established as a singer, he turned his attention to resuming his film career. Out of the blue came an offer to co-star in The Young Lions with the two biggest actors of the 50s, Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift.
My manager called and said, would you mind working with Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift? I said, are you drunk? Would I mind? I said, I'd love it.
With his performance as a New York playboy turned soldier, Dean became a film star in his own right. After the success of The Young Lions, he appeared in Some Came Running with his old friend Frank Sinatra.
They needed somebody in Some Came Running who was supposed to drink a lot and gamble and go with women. They just, well, don't go any farther. My dearest friend, Dean Martin, that was made for him. And I think that role was made for me because that was one of the best roles I've ever done.
I learned a little while back that certain conditions bring a gambler luck, you know? And, oh, thank you. And this here hat's one of them. You know, every time I take this hat off, something bad happens to me.
During filming, Martin and Sinatra became even closer.
Between you and me, that little old school teacher of yours, you know, she ain't too good an influence. You know, ever since you give up drinking, you've been impossible.
They had such a good time together. The only problem was, is that, as Dean said, he said Frank wanted to keep me up late all the time.
In January 1960, along with Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, Frank and Dean brought the fun they had off stage to the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas.
I don't remember any performer being so instantly loved as Dean. If you would look at the audience, when he came out, the smiles on their face in anticipation of what he was going to say or do was absolutely unbelievable.
While Frank called the show the Summit, the papers had another name for them: the Rat Pack.
When you were in Vegas and they were there was an excitement to the town that you could feel it was electric. The town came alive.
I like it. I like the one where the teacher said, "Charming, you got a fairy godmother?" He said, "No, but we got an uncle we keep a close eye on." Then I should have come in, folks.
It was like an orgy of these funny guys. And there was no show. There wasn't like, you do this, I'll do this, you do. They were just there. They sang, they kibitzed. It was the hottest ticket in the world.
Yeah, well, we see the thing. I'm going down to the Mystic night to the Sea Laws there, and we're going to talk to a few people. Hey, if all the women in Texas were as ugly as your mama, the Lone Ranger's going to be alone for a long time, yeah.
By 1964, Dean Martin was one of the busiest performers in Hollywood. In just 4 years, he made 15 films. The Rat Pack films, Ocean's 11, Sergeant's 3, 4 for Texas, and Robin and the Seven Hoods. And others like the western Rio Bravo with John Wayne and the musical Bells Are Ringing with Judy Holliday. By then, he and Jeannie were the proud parents of 7 children. America's favorite swinger was actually a dedicated family man.
He was home every night for dinner. That was one of the things I asked of him, and he never reneged on that. We had dinner, all of us, every single night.
You knew that it wasn't like your friend, the doctor, or the pharmacist's family. You knew there was something special. And also, seeing Frank Sinatra, Peter Lawford, Sammy Davis Jr. In your living room also made it a little different.
He was also in the charts again with his first hit in years.
While we were recording this album, Mood album, Dream with Dean, we get to the last song. Dean decided he didn't want to do it. Well, we had about 30 minutes left. I needed one more song. So we're discussing it out in the studio. And Dean's piano player held up his hand. And he said, "Hey, Dean, how about my song?" And Ken Lane began to play. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Ooh, that's nice. This is the one. This is the hit.
Everybody falls in love somehow.
Everybody Loves Somebody became the first single to knock the Beatles off the #1 slot. With its success, Dean's recording career took off. Over the next year and a half, he'd have 7 gold albums in a row. By the mid-1960s, Dean Martin was appearing in living rooms across the country on TV's biggest variety shows. He was such a hit during an appearance at the Hollywood Palace that every network wanted him for a series of his own. He agreed only if he could do 1 day a week. He didn't think anyone would go for it, but he was wrong.
Love somebody sometime. Everybody falls in love somehow.
On Thursday, September the 16th, 1965, Dean made his debut on NBC's The Dean Martin Show.
There's no point in singing the whole song. You might not buy the record. If your picture looks a little out of focus, that's the way you look to me, too. I'll tell you that. Now, you know I'm getting tired already? No, don't laugh. I got a whole season to do this NBC show, and they ain't taking any chances.
At first, reviews and ratings were unpromising.
The first 3 shows consisted of Dean singing a couple of songs, introducing a monkey act, a juggling act, a singer who hadn't been on the charts in 3 years.
After NBC sacked the show's producer, Dean asked for Greg Garrison to take over. The first thing Garrison did was to tailor the show to fit around Dean.
He's a great-looking guy, and what are you going to surround a great-looking guy with, you know? You got to surround him with great-looking girls.
Before long, Dean found himself in the company of a bevy of beauties, the Gold Diggers, Their weekly frolics with Dean gave a touch of sex to primetime.
As a matter of fact, it caused a couple of problems periodically because at dinner, sometimes Jeannie would say to Dean, well, who was that blonde that was paying so much attention to you? And he would say, well, that was one of Greg's friends.
Another trademark of the show was Dean's lack of rehearsal.
I had New York actors ask me, they said, is it true that Dean doesn't rehearse with you? I said, no, he doesn't. He watches it sometimes in the dressing room. Greg usually would rehearse it with you. And the first time you did it live on the air.
See, my wife bought me a toupee for our anniversary, and I'd like to return it.
Well, do you have it with you, sir?
It's under the hat.
It wasn't laziness on Dean's part. It was that he wanted to be under rehearsed. He wanted to have that adrenaline rush that whatever happens, he was going to be on top of, and he was.
Now, would you want a full exchange?
Well, I liked a straight man who didn't laugh.
Well, of course, if you wish to exchange it, we'd have to have the price tag.
You sure you worked with Jerry?
Yeah. But our stuff wasn't this funny, I'll tell you that.
There were rumors that Dean worked only one day a week, so he could play golf the rest of the time. The truth was, he was busier than ever. Taping the series, he also appeared in over a dozen films, including The Silencers, in which he starred for the first time as Matt Helm, the super spy. With the continuing success of his variety show, Dean became the highest-paid entertainer in TV when he signed a 3-year contract for $34 million.
We sold the television show to NBC about 5 or 6 years after we started. Part of that arrangement was that Dean ended up with a lot of RCA stock. The truth of the matter is that Dean was, and still is, the largest individual holder of RCA stock in the world.
Dean was generous with his success.
He said, and you're going to be my partner. I said, I thought I heard you said partner, but I know how you feel about partners, Dean. I said, we did a little joke about that. He said, we got a deal. And he reached out and he said, and I looked at him, I went, yeah, and I shook his hand. Now, we've been together for 30 years. 30 years. And that's all that's ever existed between us, was that handshake.
Every week, Dean was host to the biggest stars in show business: Frank Sinatra, Lena Horne, Louis Armstrong. He even got legends like Orson Welles and Jimmy Stewart to join in.
And then the flirty, flirty guys with their flirty, flirty eyes.
One night, he was able to realize a boyhood dream: to sing with Harry Mills and the Mills Brothers.
The guys came out and they started to rehearse. I looked at Dean and he went, the guys are great, aren't they? He said, that's the guy. Not Crosby, that's the guy.
I'd rather have a favorite dog to call my own than have a fickle-minded real life
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from... What are we training for what?
Find your fortune falling all over town. Be sure that your umbrella is up beside the downy.
By 1967, The Dean Martin Show was the #1 program on US television, with 50 million viewers a week. His Christmas show with Frank Sinatra was one of the highest-rated shows in NBC history.
Embrace me, my sweet embraceable. Embrace me, my dearest place. Just one look at you, my heart grew tipsy in me. You and you alone. It's like being on I Spy with all the running.
The Dean Martin Show continued on NBC for 9 seasons.
Above all, I want my arms about you. Don't you be a naughty baby. Come to Papa, come to Papa, my sweet embraceable you.
He was an easygoing guy, and what you didn't really realize is how impeccable his timing was, and how graceful he was in moves, and how well he worked with other talent, because it came across so naturally that you thought he was just being himself. And that was, I think, the special talent of Dean Martin.
Something in your kiss just told me.
There was one time when he sang a song, and it was just great. And I said to him, I said, Dean, that was great. And then I saw this little boy in Dean Martin, a little tiny boy who was getting complimented by me. And he said, was it? He had no protection at that moment, and he was as in need of a compliment as I was, as you were, as we all were.
In 1970, he co-starred as the pilot in the disaster film Airport. His nightclub act was still going strong, but his marriage wasn't. His busy schedule had taken its toll, and in 1973, he and Jeannie divorced. A year later, his television series ended as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, with great pride, I give you America's favorite comedian, Mr. Jack Benny.
Dean continued on television until the early 80s, hosting Celebrity Roast.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm in the most difficult position of any personality that has ever been roasted on the Dean Martin Show, because nearly everything they said about me is true.
I have a friend who loves what you do every year and who just wanted to come out and say, would you send my friend out, please? Where is he? Would you send him out here? Come here.
One of the most memorable events of Dean's career was his reunion with Jerry Lewis in September 1976.
It was the thrill of my life to have him stand there next to me.
After their appearance, Lewis and Martin continued with their separate ways for another decade. On March the 20th, 1987, Dean's son, Captain Dino Martin Jr., was reported lost during maneuvers. What was left of the plane was found on the side of a mountain. A few days later, Dino Jr. was laid to rest with a military funeral.
Now, there are a lot of people that showed up. Friends of the boy and of the family. And a guy showed up that I saw out of the corner of my eye and stood in the back. He didn't make his presence known, but he wanted to be there. It was Jerry. And he left. He didn't go over to Dean. He didn't want any cameramen from 100 feet away taking pictures of the two of them together.
That night, Dean's agent, Mort Viner, told him that Jerry had been at the funeral.
And Dean just looked at Mort and he went, "Can you get him on the phone?" Mort said, "Sure." Went in the other room, he got him on the phone, and he called Dean. He said, "Jerry's on the line." Dean went in the other room, and we saw, you know, how the extensions are when light is, you know, something is lit up on the phone, and he talked to Jerry for 20, 25 minutes, and the light went out. And then we waited for about 15, 20 minutes until he came out. And then he came out. And he looked at us and he went, I just thanked him.
Do you know how long I've been waiting in this goddamn wing here? Do you know how long?
In 1989, on Dean's 72nd birthday, Martin and Lewis appeared on stage for their last time together.
I am here to present you with this happy birthday cake for 72 years of joy that you've given to the world. And why we broke up, I'll never know.
Me either.
I have no idea what happened.
It's because I was a Jew and you were a Dago.
No, you're the Dago, I'm the Jew.
Oh, I know.
In the few years following his last appearance with Jerry, Dean seldom made public appearances. When Frank Sinatra tried to reunite the Rat Pack, Dean's heart just wasn't in it. After only a few performances, he left the tour. Many of his closest friends believe he never totally recovered from the loss of his son. By 1991, he'd given up performing for good.
We see each other, and I have dinner with him just about every Saturday night. And it's just as if it was the first week. I don't know how to explain that. But if ever there were pain, there was pain, there was always much more laughter and love.
Everybody finds somebody someplace.
We had a genius in our midst, unrecognized, probably unfulfilled, and more than likely the most underrated, greatest straight man that ever lived.
That someplace.
It's such a pleasure these days to be able to speak of Dad, because there's been a quiet period since Vegas ended, since the shows ended. I feel that has not been able to appreciate how everyone loves him and cares for him.
Made it well worth waiting.
I don't know of any more honest performer in show business than Dean. And the audience knew, they felt his honesty.
The guy that I know, the guy that I've spent the last 30 years with, is the sweetest, kindest, most gentle human being I've ever known in my life.
She's a beautiful bareback rider who's going to ride a horse with no clothes on. So you better send your kids to bed unless you want them to see a horse with no clothes on.
Can I help you, sir?
Yeah, I'm in the market for a wife.
Ah, wife. Good. New or used, sir?
I haven't made up my mind.
Well, let me tell you, you've come to the right place. I'm Swingin' Sam, the wife-swapping man. I got models in all shapes.
Years of heavy drinking and smoking took their toll, and on December the 25th, 1995, Dean Martin died of respiratory failure.
Sir? Right this way, sir.
From one true great to another one now, and legends don't get much bigger than our next guest. Stand by as Priscilla Presley hosts some of the greatest performances of the one and only Mr. Elvis Presley after the break.